We have been studying in this quarter the conquest of the land. We were with the Israelites as they crossed the Jordan River. We have been with them through the conquest of Jericho, Ai. We talked about the southern campaign and all of the great victories they had there. And we're beginning our look at the northern campaign. It's in Joshua, the 11th chapter. And I may have already gone over some of this as we finish the last lesson, but I will look at it once again. In chapter 11, it said, when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he's speaking of the conquests of the Israelites in the southern campaign. When he heard of this, he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Ashaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, in the Arabah south of Chinnereth, in the lowland, and in Naphtador on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. And they came out with all their troops, a great horde, and a number like sand is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces and came against Israel and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. So as we said in our last class, this was probably the most formidable force that Israel has faced thus far, in the fact that they had horses, chariots, and we noticed the presence of nearly all the Canaanite tribes, ones that Moses listed in the north: the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Hivites. Did you have something, Marcus, please?
It was just kind of half joke, but it's really the truth. You know, I know the Canaanites think they're doing something here, but it was so nice of them to gather everybody up in a convenient spot for Israel to destroy, you know? If you think about it, as long as God fights on their side, that is the outcome of any battle. And so no matter how many they gather together, so they just made it very convenient.
And it's to Marcus's point, this is really the only battle, although it may last some period of time, this is really the only battle that's talked about. Excuse me. As far as the northern campaign. And the 6th verse, Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them. This is going to be a massive victory for Israel. So as I've said it several times, so the battle is as good as over. If God is on your side, you can't lose. And he talks about the chariots and the horses, and God did not want Israel to depend on things like that for victory. They wanted Israel to depend upon him. He tells them to cripple the horses, but not to the point where they couldn't be useful. He doesn't say go out and just kill them. In fact, as we'll see later, he's told the Israelites to take whatever plunder they need from these victories to be used for their own good. Verse 7 says, Joshua and all his warriors came suddenly against them by the waters of Merom and fell upon them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel, who struck them and chased them as far as Great Sidon and Misrephoth, Maim, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpah. And they struck them and excuse me, and they struck them until he left none remaining. And Joshua did to them just as the Lord said to him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. So once again, we see that Joshua acts immediately. He catches the armies there by surprise. He routs the Canaanite army and destroys their weapons instead of keeping them for his own army. And Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor and struck its king with the sword, for Hazor formerly was the head of all those kingdoms. And we're seeing a little bit more organization here in the north than we did in the south. We see that Hazor is or was the head of all these kingdoms. So there's apparently some organization there. And they struck with the sword all who were in it, devoting them to destruction. And there was none left that breathed. And he burned Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua captured and struck them with the edge of the sword, devoting them to destruction, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But none of the cities that stood on mounds did Israel burn, except Hazor alone. That Joshua burned. And all the spoil of these cities, and the livestock, the people of Israel took for their plunder. But every person they struck with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they did not leave any who breathed. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Why do you think Hazor was the only city that was burned in this case? Yes, sir.
Because it was the chief city that basically represented, it held the leadership, if you will, and the point needed to be made that leadership is now being dissolved.
Very good point. Hazor was a much larger city than Jericho. You remember Jericho covered about 7 acres of land on a mound. Hazor is about 200 acres. And it was utterly destroyed and burned to the ground. So why were the other cities not burned?
Israelites were going to need a place to live.
Exactly. They were left as places Israel would claim as homes for themselves after the conquest. Of course, now the fact that these cities were not burned was a bit of a mixed blessing. It left the Israelites with prepared cities and homes, but they weren't immediately ready to move into them. So other Canaanites took advantage of the vacuum that's left in these cities and moved into most of them. And that's why we find the Israelites fighting for possession of these towns and cities more than once before they can move into them. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country and all the Negev and all the land of Goshen and the lowland and the Arabah and the hill country of Israel and its lowland, from Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir, as far as Baal Gad and the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. And he captured all their kings and struck them and put them to death. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. They took them all in battle. For it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destruction and should receive no mercy, but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded Moses. So we see here, essentially in one battle, that Joshua took all of the land, meaning generally the land of Canaan entirely. And verse 18 says it took a long time. You know, when we read the record of Joshua, we might get the impression that it happened in just a few weeks. And one way we can determine how long the conquest took is from Caleb's statement in the 14th chapter. Caleb reminds Joshua that he was 40 years old when they were spies together at Kadesh Barnea. He says it's been 45 years since that time. Caleb is now 85 years old. The Israelites wandered 39 years after Kadesh Barnea, plus the year it had taken them to arrive at Gilgal. And that means the series of battles described and summarized in these last few chapters of Joshua took approximately 6 years. That's how long this conquest lasted. Verse 19 says, there was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel. Their hearts were hardened. They were proud. Of course, God truly accepted the repentant Canaanites who surrendered and submitted to the God of Israel, notably Rahab, the Gibeonites, and possibly the people of Shechem. Verse 21, and Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. In Deuteronomy, the 9th chapter, Moses predicted the defeat of the Anakim. But in verse 22, it says there are some left, only in Gaza, and Gath, and Ashdod. We know the giant Goliath came from the city of Gath. And this is some 500 years later when we'll read about him. In 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. Now we note here that the Canaanite kings were crushed. It was not every small village had been conquered and occupied. That was going to be up to each individual tribe to take care of that thing which was appointed to them. Anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to make at this point after this great victory? Yes.
Yeah, we see like the nation on a roll here, so to speak. And we see, especially there in the first 15 verses, you see that it keeps going back and referencing, he's doing it just the way he was commanded to do it.
Yes.
I think that's a lesson for us today, that we should be faithful and obedient to what we've been commanded to do too. We'll be blessed as well.
Anyone else? Yes.
Well, I asked your opinion on this. We have a practical reason why they didn't clear all the people out. Like you said, they got rid of the kings and the armies, but then little by little they had to take the land. And, and God said, so the animals don't, multiply. And I guess one of the worst things you can do is let something just grow over, just kind of leave it, so, clear all the people out. But do you see another standpoint that it's going to test the people to see just how faithful they are to God, and it kind of leaves it up to them. God could have cleared everyone out and there would have been no problem. But some responsibility falls on their shoulders to, do what God said. And it's kind of like him testing them out in the wilderness, let them get thirsty or hungry. He wasn't going to let them die, but, it's those moments that this is how life is. It's going to test us.
This issue was dealt with back in Deuteronomy, the 7th chapter. And God said he would not drive out all the Canaanites immediately. One reason was lest wild animals filled the land. And he would drive them out little by little so that the Israelites would care for all the land that they took. But God assured them that he would be with them as long as they were doing their part. So we'll move on to the 12th chapter. Now this list, there's quite a list here in the 12th chapter. It seems a little tedious to us to read every one of these names of the kings and the cities because these events happened 3,500 years ago. But for the people who would inherit this land, it was essential to know what land belonged to them. So instead of reading or paraphrasing in this chapter, we're just going to summarize and point out particular facts of interest. In the first 6 verses, we have the names of the kings defeated beyond the Jordan toward the sun rising. In other words, that's on the east side of the Jordan. We know the names of the 2 kings, Sihon and Og. Sihon's kingdom is said to have been found from the Arnon River. Let me go down one. And I know this map is probably a little too small for you. It's almost too small for me to see on this one. Arnon River, which is right here, Sihon, and it goes all the way up here to the Jabbok River. So all of this area in here belonged to Sihon. Now Og's kingdom is said to have reached from the border, which we just pointed out here, the Jabbok River, all the way up, not just to here, but all the way up to Mount Hermon, a vast territory. All of these territories on this side of the river were given to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Now concerning Sihon and Og, we would note that both of these kings attacked Israel unprovoked. Israel was simply passing through their land. So after defeating those kings, these tribes came together and asked Moses for permission to settle in this land. Now, of course, we understand the dispute or the misunderstanding that took place there. And once they got that ironed out, yes, you can have this land, but you must allow the armies, the fighting men, to continue. And this continue on with the children of Israel until they have conquered the land that God actually intended them to have at the beginning. And we know that this took 6 years. So these fighting men were away from their families for 6 years, at least. Yes, sir.
I think also that it doesn't go back and describe it, but they probably had at least some rotate back and forth, things like helping with harvest and helping with planting for time and other things. You know, you've got the entire logistics of needing to feed and house all of Israel during this time as you slowly give them places to move into. And so I'm sure I would be pretty certain that just as a matter of being able to accomplish all of it, that they would either have to take times off attacking, or at least they would have to send some groups back to help with moving all of the, you know, those that were not fighting age in and helping them with things and such. And so, I mean, this is the kind of thing, this is the huge undertaking. You have to go back and look at things that, I mean, we don't generally study, as far as schools and such go, details of a lot of wars and things before the Civil War. Even then, they were able to move people around by train on tracks, large distances, large amounts of equipment, you know, in shorter amounts of time. So we don't really have the feel for how long it would take to go between places and to fight these kind of battles and to do that kind of thing. So you know, for a place the size of that, it feels kind of strange that it would take so long to do it until you really go back and say, well, you know, how long would it take me basically to go up and down all of the areas there, pushing a wheelbarrow full of rocks without any roads? So that's the approximation of what they have to do when they're having to go. You know, sometimes they've got trails, and there are some major-ish roads, but a lot of these places, you know, it's backwoods. It's just trails that you maybe can fit one wagon down, and things like that. And those kind of things, it's a lot slower travel and everything else.
So we see all the reasons why this would have taken 6 years to defeat all of these kings. And it's important to note there is not a city or a king left in Canaan that's able to put an army on the field against Israel. Now the rest of this chapter is just simply a list given of the kings conquered beyond the Jordan on the west. And these kings are listed pretty well in chronological order, their defeat. Listing the king of Jericho, king of Ai, the kings of the southern campaign, and the kings of the northern campaign, just as the narrative has described. And the list also includes some kings from cities not specifically mentioned in the narrative. There's 31 kings in all that were conquered. This summary gives a record of all the kings and cities that had been conquered by this point. As I said, there is no king left in the land able to put an army on the field to fight against the Israelites. But there were still many Canaanites left in the land. And God's plan for the invasion and conquest of Canaan was moving right along just as He intended it. God has led them to victory over every king and every city that challenged them. The Israelites are in control of the land, but there's a subtle difference between controlling the land and owning the land. And we'll see that played out as we finish or continue through our study in the book of Joshua, and particularly in the study of the book of Judges. The final task of clearing out all those inhabitants of all the villages will be done little by little, just as Moses said in Deuteronomy, the 7th chapter. And He will help them as long as they were doing their part. What was their part?
The Lord told them to, the way He told them to do it.
All right? What about the bigger picture? Well, that is pretty big. That covers a lot of territory. they would have to obey God. They would have to know and follow all of his statutes, the Ten Commandments, the law that had been written down by Moses. Kind of like us today, we live under a law. We have a constitution in this country. And as long as we follow that, we're able to live in this country as free people. If Israel obeyed God, they would be able to occupy this land and keep it. Did anybody have any comments? Yes.
Now we get to the other part of the point, and I wonder, you know, I mean, we're not given tons of information on why on some of this, but, you know, from here on, when Israel starts to fail to drive people out, and I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that now that we're dividing up the land, and that it's each tribe's responsibility to drive the people out on their own, you know, now we don't have everybody united together. Now we don't have the solid leadership of Joshua with that faith in front of us driving the people out. Now instead of one big united group, we're kind of, you know, they're divided out into their tribes, into smaller groups. And even though the Lord's still with them just the same amount as he would have been before, but now without, you know, it's harder to be more alone. It's harder to be in a smaller group of people than it is in a larger group of people doing something. Do they have too much faith in their own numbers and not enough when there were less of them? You know, if this really comes to show, you know, when we get into the Judges, we get into Gideon, and the Lord says, no, there's too many of y'all. Send some home. Send some home. I'm going to prove to y'all that I can save no matter how many of y'all that are there. That it's correcting a misconception, perhaps, that maybe the people had, at least a little bit, when they were supposed to be driving the rest of the kingdom.
And someone else over here had a comment. Wes?
Just a quick note, you know, when you read a list like we find in chapter 12, it's easy to maybe just read over that. Not all of these names just jump out at us. Maybe Jerusalem, we know that was, you know, I don't know exactly what the wall looked like at that point in time or the defenses, but that's a city on a hill. But the last one mentioned here, Tirzah, maybe comes to mind a little bit. That was, at one point in time, that was the capital of the tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom, till the time of Omri, wasn't it, that moved into Samaria? But anyway, this was a mighty city for Israel later. It's mentioned in Song of Solomon's when I think about it, you know, as being a beautiful city on a hill, a crown. And I just, the point that I think I need to remember is, we read through this list here, every one of these was a challenge. You ever seen the picture of these law officers that have to go in and try to take somebody out of a house that's armed? How dangerous that is. We say, wow, that's a house that is dangerous. But think about a city determined, fortified, but one after another, 31 kings are taken out. This is the great power of God. And that's the point we make. We learn to lean on God. You know, and time after time, when we do, he answers our prayer. He keeps his promise. It's a faith-building exercise, and I hope it will be for me. You know, we're going to run into some high-wall enemies in life. Check yourself. Make sure you're on the Lord's side. Do it his way. Do it the right way. Do the hard thing. And then just trust him for the outcome. And it's a little list, but it ought not be dry to me. It ought to be a great reminder to me.
And there are a couple of perspectives when we look at the 6 years that it took to take this land. Reading through the narrative, we think maybe it didn't take that long. then we realize that it took 6 years. On the other hand, 6 years is not a long time to take an entire country, at least by the methods that had to be done here. 6 years was not a long time. And sort of illustrates how God was with Israel. Imagine how long it would have taken if they just had to go in on their own and slog it out. If they had to go in on their own, they never would have gone in, I suspect. Do you have any other questions about any of the battles or any of the things that we've read so far? Well, it's time to divide the land. And that begins in the 13th chapter. Now Joshua was old, advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, "You are old, advanced in years, and there remains very much land yet to be possessed. This is the land that yet remains, all the territory of the Philistines, and all that of the Geshurites, from Sihor, which is east of Egypt, as far as the border of Ekron, northward, which is counted as Canaanite. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazites, the Ashdodites, the Ashkelonites, the Gittites, and the Ekronites, and the Avites. From the south, all the land of the Canaanites, the Merah that belongs to the Sidonians as far as Aphek, to the border of the Amorites, the land of the Gebalites, and all Lebanon toward the sunrise, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon as far as the entrance to Hamath. All the inhabitants of the mountains, from Lebanon as far as the brook of Mizrephoth, and all the Sidonians, I will drive them out from before the children of Israel. Only divide it by lot to Israel as an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Now therefore, divide this land as an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh." A couple of points that we just read. He says that, "Joshua, you are old." He says that to me every morning. You know, Joshua lived to be 110 years old. He was 90 or 95 between those years, 90 to 95 old at this time. And even though Joshua was old, and God acknowledges this, he tells him that he still has work to do, that Israel still has work to do. There remains yet much land to possess. And this was true of the land on the west side of the river. The main portion of the Canaanite power had been defeated, but Israel had to occupy and drive out the remaining inhabitants. Of course, on the east side, as we understand it, the occupation was very complete, although there would still be pockets of resistance that they would have to deal with there. He talks about the regions of the Philistines, being the territory on the coastal plain. That's down here. I'm looking at this thing and it's too small to see anyway. Takes in cities like Gath, Ashtaroth. Let's talk just a moment about the Philistines. Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of those names immediately sticks out because back at the end of chapter 11, we were told that the only of the animals left were in Gaza and Gath. And of course, we know later on from Philistine that they'll have to deal with in the future. It's a giant.
They will have to deal with them for the next 500 years. You know, the Philistines were not technically Canaanites. They had migrated from the island of Crete. In light of what Paul wrote to Titus in the New Testament, it was a wonder they ever got off the island to start with. How did they make it to Israel? And he talks about the region of the Geshurites. The Geshurites were found in the northern parts of the land of Israel, actually north of Manasseh. So in Joshua, let's see, 13, where was I? In chapter 13 and verse 8. It reads, with the other half tribe, the Reubenites and the Gadites received their inheritance, which Moses had given them, beyond the Jordan eastward, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given them. And he describes the land from Aroer, which is on the bank of the Arnon River, and the town that is in the midst of the ravine, and all the plain of Medeba, as far as Dibron, and all the cities of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, as far as the border of the children of Ammon. Gilead. Remember Gilead, how it got its name. When Jacob returned from his extended journey, he named this place Gilead. It was on the border of the Geshurites and the Machathites, all Mount Hermon and all Bashan as far as Salcah, all the kingdom of Og and Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth and Edrei, who remained of the remnant of the giants, for Moses had defeated and cast out these. Verse 13. We'll note this is one of the biggest problems for Israel during the next 500 years. Nevertheless, the children of Israel did not drive out the Geshurites or the Maacathites, but the Geshurites and the Maacathites dwell among the Israelites until this day. So we see the problem which is developing here, that they have not driven out these pockets of resistance of Canaanites. Now, verse 14, as we begin to divide the land, it says, only to the tribe, and he'll say this several times throughout the next couple of chapters, only to the tribe of Levi he had given no inheritance, the sacrifices of the Lord God of Israel made by fire are their inheritance, as he said to them. The Levites would not receive a land portion. Now, what would the Israelites receive? Marcus.
Their service was to the Lord. They were the only tribe that was allowed to do, anything really that had anything to do with the service to the Lord at the temple and the worship and things like that. They had proven before that they were the most zealous for the Lord.
Yep.
And he promised them that their inheritance would be service to him, and people would look at that like by land and think, man, that sounds pretty. But anybody with any kind of faith is going to look at that and say, wow, what an amazing inheritance.
And no land inheritance. You remember back at the mount, the Lord, or Moses asked who was on the Lord's side. And the Levites stepped up there. You think that not getting a portion of the land itself would be kind of a raw deal. But they were getting something much greater. than just land. They were getting to be able to serve God every day. Now, they did receive some cities. I think there were 6 cities of refuge and some like 48 actual cities where they could settle and live and actually keep herds, but no significant portion of the land. Marcus?
Just also, you know, the fulfillment of the prophecy from Jacob. When he talked about Levi, and he talked about Simeon, and he talked about what they'd done, you know, to Shechem in their rage, said they would be scattered.
We only got a couple of minutes left. I hate to get into the next actual division of the land, talking about each tribe's territory. If you got something else, Marcus?
I got a question for Wes because I can't remember the life of me. About when do the Phoenicians settle Carthage?
I'm not sure. I don't know. It's, I know they are related. You know,
I know
the
the
Carthaginians and the Philistines, you know, they have.
I know they rose to be a big empire about 900 BC.
Yeah.
My point being is that also with part of the difficulty of driving these people from the land is for the time. You know, these are not just people fighting with sticks. These are very advanced people. We've already talked about how they come out with chariots, you know, against the Israelites and such. And so, you know, the Lord has not given them something that just requires nothing to do. It's going to require great faith in Him to be able to drive these people out. You know, you get the sense, and we tell the story from the spies like it should have just been a foregone conclusion. But you know, you think of these people going in. There's this advanced seafaring civilization in Phoenicia. There are giants, you know, with the Philistines. There are, you know, these huge walled cities. Jericho's got giant thick walls. I mean, this is not small stuff. But and you know, so when we're talking, I'm just trying to remember, you know, exactly how advanced Phoenicia was at this point. I wasn't sure if they would have been where they were founding Carthage yet or not, in the grand scheme of things. But I know they grow strong enough too in the not too distant future, around not long after Solomon is into the divided kingdom, they'll become an empire. I don't know if they've got to the point where they're settled and they're starting to form those countries yet or not.
That's about all the time that we have this morning. I want to thank you for all the comments, contributions to the class. We seem to have moved through this rather quickly.